Walter's going to heckle me. All right, Walter, give it your best. I feel like I might just be a little loud, a little warm, maybe not. Joe, good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. So, Craig mentioned that, that our quarterly theme is sort of based on a more traditional kind of calendar in the Middle East, whether it be in Persia, which they celebrate what's known as Megra, which is the beginning of the year. In Judaism, we're in what's known as the High Holy Days. Last week was Rosh Hashanah, and then Wednesday night is Yom Kippur. So it's also the celebration of a new year. But what is interesting in these traditions, it's not just that we celebrate like Happy New Year, but it's also kind of we celebrate Happy Birthday. And it's not just the birthday of the world, but it is said that it is the birthday of the universe. So we really begin to celebrate the initiation or the beginning of creation. And what I just kind of want to offer you now, obviously no one knows the day that the universe began, of course. But it's something to just kind of keep in mind. This, in the imagination, there's this idea of this incredible evolutionary experience that is visiting itself through us as becoming aware. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin says that we are evolution become conscious. We are how an awakening intelligent universe is becoming self-aware. And as I was reflecting on that this week, I was thinking about something about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It is said in the traditional idea of Rosh Hashanah is it's not just the celebration of the new year, but it's said that on Rosh Hashanah, our fate for the year is written. And on Yom Kippur, which begins at sunset Wednesday night, it is sealed. And so it is said that this period is called a holy time because we're reflecting on how our life will be experienced based on the choices and endeavors that we participate in. Now, what I also want to say, and maybe this is a prelude to next week, is I don't want to approach this as some sort of fatalistic experience, kind of like, you step on a crack, you break your mother's back kind of thing, like, oh my God, I forgot to do something, light a candle or burn some incense or apologize to somebody, and here it is Yom Kippur, and my whole year is doomed. Because what we see in so many other traditions, including Judaism, including Islam, including Buddhism and Christianity, and all of them, there is also this idea, what the Christians call metanoia, which is this opportunity to change direction, or we call it grace, or we call it bhakti. There's different words for it, but what it says is there's no such thing as being too late. In fact, something that is attributed to the Buddha where he says, it doesn't matter how many times you forget, as long as you remember. And you can even forget after that, as long as you remember. So it's this concept of the Holy One, this that we call God, by whatever name we use, is the presence of unrelenting love. And what I like to say often, because I think it's something for us always to remember, that the truest thing about each and every one of us is that we are seen, we are known, and we are loved by the very intelligence and preciousness and power that brings all things into creation. And I've been kind of thinking this week, because I kind of do this time of year, I do it a lot, but this time of year, I think often in terms of this idea that there is a really interesting similarity between the theory or the story of the Big Bang and the stories that are told in Kabbalah. I think they kind of tell something very similar using different kinds of languages. In the Big Bang, what we know is somewhere in I think it was like 1986, is when they were able to trace through sound what they figured was the very beginning of where the Big Bang would have occurred, and it looks like the universe is expanding everywhere at one point in all directions everywhere. And you know, it seems that 14 plus billion years ago, there was an event that draws out of something known as the singularity. And what that essentially means, and I would defer to Joe on this after service, is that the singularity is something in which our present laws of physics can't address. But there was an event of such power and energy that expanded out beyond our ability to measure heat. It was in keldons and in times that we can't even imagine, in billions of years. But there was this sort of great expansion and then contraction and then expansion out again. And in these billions of years, there was sort of this vast cosmic plasma of pure energy. And then what began to happen is there were fluctuations in this, temperatures, issues, and that created carbon. It created, what do you call this, periodic table of elements, thank you very much. Created elements, and then there were these vast explosions and, you know, this violence of stars exploding and energy moving and crashing and temperatures fluctuating, and that gave way to the stars, that gave way to planets, that gave way to a interesting little backwater planet in a galaxy long ago and far away, in a solar system that is probably easily overlooked by any kind of travelers, to this little planet here, to us having a conversation about, isn't this just friggin' amazing? And Kabbalah tells a story very similar of these vast vessels that are so filled with energy that they literally explode, and that this vastness, this energy, this Shekhinah, spreads across the known universe and then begins to cool, and ash begins to form, and there's something known as Tikkun Olam, which is to heal the universe, to heal the earth, to heal our lives. And that's our task, is to see the light, even if it appears to be covered in ash. It's to redeem, to heal, to be that presence. St. Teresa of Avila says it is that we are the ears, the eyes, the hands, and the feet of the divine. It is how the divine moves itself. And so whatever tradition we may look at, what we may find is a rhythm, a rhyme, because perhaps there's an echo in our soul that begins to kind of understand this and comprehend this in some way. You know, and you know, I think that there's a couple things that I want to talk about that. One is this whole idea that, you know, it's never too late. And what's interesting about Kabbalah, what's interesting about the Big Bang, which I think is interesting about them from a metaphysical conversation, is that creation happens not because of some predetermined plan, but by fluctuations, mistakes, errors, changes in things that can't be anticipated, and yet they happen, and there's a response from the universe in such a way that it creates that. And if you look at evolution, that's exactly what evolution is it's always a response to what is happening. It's a response to a weather change, or whatever the case may be, of something happen. And if we think about our own lives, because what we know is evolution is not an event that happened. Evolution is an experience that is ongoing. This isn't the final stop. We are here in a moment of unimaginable time. But here in this moment, we are aware. And us being aware means that we are at that stage of evolution where the universe is starting to awaken and become aware. Here on this little backwater planet, this kind of thing is happening. And how it happens is through each and every one of us. Because if you think about it, if you think about your life, the challenge was to think about a moment where beauty stopped you in your tracks. It was a metanoia. It was a change in consciousness. Whether it was the birth of a child or watching a storm or whatever the case may be, something shifted in us. And our lives have been different ever since. And sometimes those are positive things, like the birth of a child. Sometimes they're negative things, or what we consider negative, like a disease or a divorce or a loss of a job or whatever the case may be. These things stop us in our tracks. And yet, we realize that something happens as a result of that. And here we are sitting telling the tale about it and wherever we may be with this whole thing. And I also think, for myself as I'm sitting with this, one of the great mythologies, one of the great book of legends is the Bible. Now, I love the Gita, and anybody that knows me knows probably if I had such a thing as a personal scripture, it's Lord of the Rings. I don't make any mistake about that. But just as much, I love the Bible. And I think most people that are critical of the Bible are kind of ignorant of the Bible, because there's this idea going around that the Bible is, yes, inspired, as so much literature is inspired. Whether that be the Gita, the Quran, or the Lord of the Rings, or poetry, or whatever, the stuff of Rumi, it can be inspired, meaning that the person or the persons who are writing this thing or experiencing these things are tapping into something that is incredibly transcendent. And what we know is when words fail us, art, beauty, poetry is the language that we use. And so scripture can be inspired, and it doesn't mean it has to be inerrant. And I think that was one of the things that, we've had to make sacrifices in our evolution. We had to give up our prehensile tail. We only got 2 sets of teeth, and somehow or another in the West, we began to think that the Bible is inerrant, that we have to believe it word for word, and we don't. We can allow ourselves to be inspired by it and realize these are stories, these are legends, this is poetry written by people who are having different kinds of experiences. And it's okay to say, in this area right here, especially when it comes to things like physics, they're kind of off. Or when it comes to cultural things, maybe it's different here in 2025 than it was wherever that may be. But in either case, there's something about these creation stories, these beautiful poetry about these stories that talk about, very differently than other creation myths, is that this creator takes incredible delight in its creation. It's unlike, say, like the Egyptians, where there's a great battle, or the Greeks, where one god is eating the children of his children, and one, castrates him, and all these other kinds of things. And Egypt, someone takes the body and spreads it, and that's, there's all these wild stories, and they're interesting. And again, no one's saying that they're true or real. And this story takes place in a garden. And a garden in which the Holy One who was creating it is delighted in its creation and says, this is good, this is good, this is good. When it comes to humanity, he doesn't say this is good. He says, it's not good to be alone, but then this is good. But it doesn't stop there, because I think we have been conditioned in our mind to think that in that creation myth, we're supposed to believe that humans are the pinnacle of this creation that is taking place. But it isn't, because something else happens after us. Takers? God creates the Sabbath. The Sabbath is even more of the evolutionary experience than humanity itself. It's as if the Sabbath wasn't created for us because we tell the story that God rested. Well, how can God rest? Seriously. How hard is it to create a universe if you're God? But it's not so much that God rested, but God took pleasure in its creation. and enjoyed it. And the Sabbath is a vision. It's an idea. It's a template. It's a lure of saying this experience where I can enjoy my life, that I can be free of any forms of trappings, but that the act of the evolutionary direction of the universe is joy, enjoyment, at-one-ment, togetherness. Because one of the things that I'm thinking sometimes I might want to do a book study on the book of Genesis, because I teach it in the school of ministry. I might as well talk about it here. But this idea that because everything is good, nothing is not good in this creation. And because everything is good, everything can be enjoyed. Now I'm not going to get real Pollyanna and say, yeah, earthquakes or terrible acts that humanity perpetrates and other people are good. They're not. But because I want to get into that in just a second. But this idea, what if our vision of living on the earth was one that we didn't see ourselves opposed to anything, but participating in everything? How would our relationship to the earth be if we saw ourselves as stewards of a garden as opposed to being separate from it? And what if we looked at how we tend a garden as opposed to what we can extract from it? What would it be like to have an economy, a politic, that was based not on separation or of limited resources, but rather on a sense of there's a renewing and there's a togetherness and no one or nothing is left out, and that we're all part of it. And so I think what the creation story tells us then is this idea of what is possible, a Sabbath, a universe that exists at Sabbath, not at rest, but in enjoyment, not at war, not pushing against, but participating in. And I think it's a pretty cool imagination to have. And I think, but we do get to this idea of the things that work and don't work. We get to this idea of good and evil and how that is talked about. But what I want to offer before I even go there is perhaps a correction of those two words. In the Arabic language, in the Aramaic, which was spoken by Jesus, and in the ancient Semitic languages, there isn't a word for good, and there isn't a word for evil. They don't exist. The closest that they have is ripe or unripe. So here's the thought. St. Paul says in one of his epistles that even evil can be turned to good for those who are connected to the Holy One. Another way of saying that is even what is unripe can become ripe. Even what is evil, even what is unripe can become ripe. And so when we look at the world and we see true evil in the world, shooters, genocides, fascism, you name it, these things, we can look out. It is easy for us to say, this is evil. But what if we said instead, what I'm seeing is unripe. It hasn't reached its fulfillment yet. And then again, going back to this Hebrew idea of tikkun olam, to heal what is broken, to nurture. In the Hebrew Bible, there's all this imageries about gardening, and you don't punish plants, you work with plants. And if the fruit is unripe, you are patient with it to bring it to that sense of fullness. It's about participation. And I think what happens is we lose that, and we have these good and evil ideas and all this kind of stuff, and we get lost in that. Not only do we get lost in that, we get distracted by it. We get distracted by it so much that it becomes part of our consciousness. It becomes part of how we see things. It becomes our perception, and then we are participating in it. Eugene Therikin, who is a philosopher that I like, he wrote this. He says, "We have forgotten what medieval thinkers knew instinctively. You must not look at evil until your mind is emparadized or enraptured by it. Evil will break you and corrupt you. We believe in raising the awareness about hell, but not paradise. Hell does not prepare you to face hell. It prepares you to become part of it." So let me say this another way. You must not look at what is unripe and remember the garden of the tree of what is ripe and unripe, good and evil. You should not pay attention, focus yourself on what is unripe, lest your mind becomes enraptured by that which is unripe, and it corrupts you because you're just caught into this idea and spinning with it in our perception and our neural pathways, and everything starts organizing like, whoa, whaley, how bad. And it doesn't prepare us to do good. In fact, it has a withering experience on the soul. Dr. Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who was a public theologian and philosopher, he escaped the Holocaust. He taught at Princeton. Brilliant man. He's one of my favorite authors. But one of the things that he says about this, and I just lost my train of thought on this. It'll come back to me. Yes. He said that, and he wrote this in the 50s. He said that the greatest I'm losing the word, ecumenical. The greatest, largest ecumenical movement in Western culture is nihilism. Think about that, nihilism. That sense of why should I care? It's broken, it can't be fixed. It's a loss of vision. It's a withering effect. It's a level of cynicism that gives rise to all kinds of maladies. And so it is important for us as metaphysicians not to become entrapped by the Palantir, by the thing that is unripe to the point that our soul begins to become unripe. Next week I won't talk about it next week, but I want to talk about it a lot, is in Lord of the Rings is Denethor. Denethor, like Saruman, they are people who have access to something called the Palantir, remember that word, because in that their whole vision is distorted and they become captive by the very force they're hoping to oppose. So, what do we do about that? What do you do about that? What do I do about that? There's something interesting about, so I want to offer you a part of John Keats' famous poem, An Ode to a Grecian Urn. And in his last lines of this, just about the end of the poem, he says this: "Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you need to know on earth, and all that needs to be known." This is kind of like from Plato, is that we can recognize truth through beauty, and that all truth has a level of beauty to it. But again, one of the things that I see or I sit with in Western thinking, especially Western spiritual evolution, that's very different from, say, the Eastern Orthodox. In the West, we have invented all these wild ideas like atonement and substitutionary indulgence, all these kinds of things. The East doesn't have that. The East holds this idea in the Orthodox of beauty. In fact, Fyodor Dostoevsky says this. He says that I believe that beauty will save the world. And there's a metaphysical truth in that. Because if we can look at and see the beauty of creation, you guys all said it here at the very beginning of service, it transforms you. And the more we allow ourselves to become transformed through beauty, whether that be, a memorial service of crows. Interestingly enough, a group of crows are called a murder of crows, but a celebration of life. I know that whales do this as well. Elephants do this, they've seen. They actually have memorials. If we can allow that, or the birth of a child, if we can remember that, or the beauty of our garden, or something that our pet has done, or wherever we experience beauty, look on that. Look on that. Let your attention be on the good, the true, and the beautiful, and it will transform you, me, us. And then something else happens without us even having to do anything, because you've experienced it, I'm sure, because I have too. It's this, is that when we are in that moment of flow, in that experience of beauty, something changes in us that it catches other people's attention. What's up with you today? What's up with me today is that I am in beauty. I am in beauty. There's that beautiful Hopi prayer that says, beauty is before me, beauty is behind me, beauty is above me, beauty is below me, beauty is on my left hand, beauty is on my right hand. I am on the pollen path. I am on the path of growth. I am on the path of fullness. I am on the path of ripening. So let us be ripe fruit. And we become ripe fruit by where our attention is. In the Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri writes, that time is love. And what he means by that is no matter what you say, what you spend the most time with is the thing you really love. And the thing you really love is the thing that you become. If you read the Inferno, every character in hell is simply trapped into the thing that they spent the most time, most attention in love with. So let our love be on the beauty, and we become the beautiful, the ripe, the fullness. And when we become that, we are giving a micro-treatment to the planet itself. Pierre Teilhard says to trust the long work of God. We want the immediate. We want to control it. But a controlled world, as Hartmut Rosa says, is a dead world. A living world is chaotic and organic, and it takes time. It is the opportunity to be in a garden or the victim of a machine. Thank you.